You honestly couldn't make this up. A deadlock in Parliament over a plan to break the deadlock in Parliament. A vote in the Commons ending in the first tie for 26 years. The Speaker, citing convention, used his casting vote to defeat the plan to give MPs more indicative votes. But could talks between Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn actually lead to a breakthrough? They spoke for 2 hours this afternoon, though Mr Corbyn said without as much change as he'd expected. 2 more ministers resigned over the fact the meeting took place at all. And then another whisker-thin vote with a majority of just 1, allowing MPs to debate a bill which would force the government to negotiate a Brexit delay. They're voting right now on its second reading. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is with me. Gary.
Interesting language there from Jeremy Corbyn. Inconclusive, maybe not enough signs of change on the government side. I think he's now in with the shadow cabinet, and that's going to be a pretty tricky meeting for him. The prize here for the Labour leadership is to look like you're ready for government, to look like you could carry the mantle of government, and that is a prize that has been elusive to Jeremy Corbyn in some quarters with the electorate. It would carry a lot of weight, but the costs are there. The word I've heard more times than I can remember today from Labour MPs is trap. This is a trap. You're going to cop the blame for something when it goes wrong. Theresa May will make sure of that. The other problem for him is that his own party, the focus has generally been on the Conservatives, but his own party has divisions here. And it was very interesting. They were clear earlier when there was a briefing on what he would be going into these talks trying to get. And it was explained by someone from his office that he would not necessarily be seeking a second referendum because that was something you needed if you were getting a pure Theresa May bad Tory deal. Well, an awful lot of Labour MPs thought that when they were backing the what was called the Carla amendment recently, that was whipped by the Labour leadership. That calls for Labour to back a referendum in all circumstances of any deal. It sounded like all that was being put to one side. And I have heard one other word a lot on the Labour side today, apart from the word trap, and that is a word you keep hearing on the Tory side: betrayal. People are working up that rhetoric already on the Labour side. For Theresa May, this has been an enormous leap and deeply unpopular with her party. Not only does she appear to be, to their eyes, some of them bigging up Jeremy Corbyn, no greater crime than that, you might think, for some of them, but also moving towards a softer Brexit potentially, and in the process of suing for a longer extension, a delay to Brexit. In the 22 committee, so they're both meeting different forums at the moment. She's in with the 22 committee of, she's not in with the 22 committee of backbenchers, but they are meeting in her absence. Liam Fox is in there speaking to them. I think they'd have liked some of them to have her in there. It's been floated in there that maybe there should be an indicative vote about her. They can't actually call a ballot under the rules of the party to say they've got no confidence in her, but that was floated. I think it was knocked down, but it's a flavour of just how hairy these times are for her. In parallel, of course, we've got the process carrying on where MPs are trying to wrest control from the government of the entire Brexit process. That's not going pretty well tonight. You mentioned the dead heat that we had in one vote, the first time in 26 years. And you have to say, generally, when you look at it today, it's been a century or so since we've seen a peacetime crisis like this.
Labour's Brexit team off to the Prime Minister's office in Parliament. Theresa May pleading for Labour's votes to help to pass her Brexit divorce deal. But can the gulf between the two sides be bridged? And might Jeremy Corbyn prefer to leave Theresa May alone in the hot seat, copping the blame for a process that has missed every deadline and now is in dire jeopardy?
I welcome her willingness to compromise to resolve the Brexit deadlock.
But for many Tory MPs, the idea of sharing government decision-making on Brexit with Jeremy Corbyn was too much. 2 more ministers resigned from the government. The Brexit Minister for No Deal Preparation wrote, "You do not want to leave the EU without a negotiated deal, and that obviously makes my job in government irrelevant." A Welsh Office Minister resigned, saying legitimising and turning to Jeremy Corbyn is a grave error. It brings to 36 the number of resignations from Theresa May's government in 12 months. That's about 1 every 10 days. At question time, Tory backbenchers echoed the resigning minister's anger.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Last week in this chamber, the Prime Minister said the biggest threat to our standing in the world, to our defence and to our economy is the Leader of the Opposition. In her judgment, what now qualifies him for involvement in Brexit?
Prime Minister!
Can I just say to my honourable friend, every member of this House is involved in Brexit. So I believe what the public want is for us to work across this House to find a solution that delivers on Brexit, delivers on the referendum, and gives people their faith that politicians have done what they asked and have actually delivered for them.
I think it's difficult to see how we move forward with any kind of acceptable Brexit outcome while the PM is still there, to be honest.
So there might be a move against her, even though the Cabinet seemed to have gone along with what she was saying, however unhappily.
Depends who you listen to. A lot of the reports are suggesting that more of the Cabinet were against this plan than for it. But, if they're not willing to stick their head above the parapet and say so, then that would make it challenging. A lot depends on them, truthfully. They're in the position to support the government's decision or not. If they decide to go along with it, that will make it really, really difficult for us to do anything.
I'm slightly struggling to work out what they thought was going to happen. I mean, politics in some ways isn't that complicated. To get something through, you have to have a majority. And if there's going to be 35 of our colleagues, whether from the sort of continuity Remain end and the hardline Brexiteer end, not voting for any deal she brings back, she's got to find those votes from elsewhere. So she's got to speak to Labour to try and find a way through it.
The Prime Minister was careful in a TV statement last night not to spell it out, but the long delay to Brexit she's expected to be handed by the EU now, even if it's tempered by an early opt-out if a deal passes in the next 2 months, deeply angered many Tory MPs.
Will she make it absolutely clear to the European Union that if they turn round and say no, it has to be a long extension and you have to fight the European Union elections, that she will say no, no, no?
Prime Minister!
I say to my right honourable friend, what I want to see now is us able to find a position where we can, across this House, support the withdrawal agreement and a deal which enables us to leave on the 22nd of May, which enables us not to have to hold those European parliamentary elections. But we can only do that if we come together and find a way forward that this House is willing to support.
In the European Parliament in Brussels, signs today that the long extension to Brexit some MPs claim the EU wants to lock Britain into isn't universally popular.
Can you imagine a little bit that the new Prime Minister of Great Britain, Mr Johnson or Mr Gove, both the architects of the Brexit disaster, would have the keys in their hands on the future of the European Union? I cannot think about it, that will happen. It will be a disaster for the European Union.
Smaller parties, precluded from the Conservative Labour talks on Brexit, complained they should be in the negotiations too.
We in Common all have been promoting a people's vote, but have been excluded from a discussion that we were included in only last week.
To the right of the Speaker's chair this evening, a very rare sight. The Labour and Conservative chief whips struggle into a crowded Commons. They'd been poring over voting numbers in disbelief. A dead heat.
The ayes to the right, 310. The noes to the left, 310.
It means the Speaker's casting vote was needed, and by tradition goes against any innovation. Another round of votes on Brexit options on Monday in this case. Now, the government says if talks with Labour fail, MPs may get them anyway.
Well, our Europe editor, Matt Fry, is with me. He's been looking at more reaction from Europe to today's developments. What's been going on?
Well, they're delighted that there's a kind of cross-party dialogue going on, but they are saying to me, why on earth didn't this take place 2 months ago, 3 months ago, when they first started calling for it? They're also sceptical that it might actually work. And at the same time, you have Guy Verhofstadt, who we just heard in Gareth's piece, and Jean-Claude Juncker as well, both playing hardball, essentially saying to Theresa May, you will not get a short extension to Article 50. You'll either crash out without a deal, accept the withdrawal agreement in Parliament, or a long extension. Now, they're not saying that that long extension until the end of the year or the beginning of next year will definitely be granted, because they have misgivings about it. It's a bit like the drunken relative leaving the family gathering and on the way out knocking over a few plants and a few lamps. They're worried that if we take part in the European parliamentary elections, which is a condition, this might open the door to all sorts of unwanted populism that they're already trying to deal with. They're also worried that we might meddle with any budget negotiations for the EU budget after the elections. And they're worried that we might try to get involved in who becomes the next Commission President. They don't want us at that party. They want us to be neutralised as much as possible unless we decide to stay in for good. So, there's a lot of trepidation here. I have to say, elsewhere in the world, there is ridicule. There's an article today in the New York Times by Tom Friedman where he said, this is a country that I love that is in the middle of committing suicide, economical suicide. They just can't decide how to kill themselves.
Thanks, Matt. Well, as the politicians fail again to come up with a solution to Brexit, preparations for no deal are costing British industry hundreds of millions. Our economics correspondent, Helia Ebrahimi, has got some new numbers. What have you found out?
Chris, there's three new figures I'd like to talk to you about. First, the aerospace industry. We knew that no deal preparations were costing that industry tens of millions of pounds. But tonight I've learned that that figure is much higher. I now understand that £500 million has been spent in the last few months alone on no deal preparations, and that money is irrecoverable, say sources. Second, you have the food and drinks industry, that's our supermarkets. Tonight they told us that the no deal uncertainty is costing them, could cost even more, £100 million a week. That's an astonishing figure, and they say that's because of extra warehousing, it's the result of shipment orders that can't get through customs. And last, Chris, you've got the British Retail Consortium. We spoke to them tonight as well, and they said that in the last few months they've spent hundreds of millions of pounds. Remember that much of our rag and shoe industry comes from outside of the UK, so that industry is particularly vulnerable.
So those are the specific costs to business on no deal, but what about the impact on the wider economy?
Yeah, as you said, those are industry numbers, and they come on top of the estimates that you've heard from the likes of the Bank of England and Goldman Sachs, who say that as much as £800 million a week is being lost from the UK economy. And it's not good news when it comes to financial assets. Last month, the UK banking industry estimated that £800 billion was being taken out of the UK and transferred to Europe. Now they think it's upwards of £1 trillion.
And what's the official data saying on the economy now?
I'm afraid that's negative too. We had PMI services data today showing that 80% of the UK economy is contracting, not growing anymore. And these figures mean that the first 3 months of this year are the worst quarter on record since 2012.
Helia, thank you very much indeed. Well, joining me now, if I can just get him to step in and put on a microphone on our slightly chaotic stage, is Alistair Campbell, campaigner for the People's Vote. Doesn't it look, Alistair Campbell, as though the referendum is being abandoned by Jeremy Corbyn?
How do you work that out?
Well, I mean, there's no sign that he's gone into his meeting with Theresa May demanding a referendum on whatever happens now.
Well, we don't know what's gone on between them, but I think that, if Jeremy Corbyn is listening to his members, to his MPs, to Britain's biggest trade union, Unison today, to the 1/3 of his own constituents who've signed the revoke petition. Listen, this is going inexorably towards a referendum. And I think it's time that both Theresa May and anybody else in there understands that, because the Brexit that was promised is undeliverable. And what if Jeremy Corbyn, he's in a really unique position now, because actually good politics and the national interest can align here. No deal, he can get her to rule that out. A long extension, which we know we're going to have to get, he can commit her to that. And what's more, he can get her to back the policy of a confirmatory referendum, because that is where this is heading.
Yeah, but the Labour policy that the front bench have been talking about is only a referendum on stopping a damaging Tory Brexit, as they describe it, not on this, which would be a Labour and Conservative Brexit, which they presumably agree on. If they can get her to sign up to a customs union.
I heard Matt there talking about some of the Europeans saying that this is like watching a country not deciding how to commit suicide. If Jeremy Corbyn were to facilitate that, what would be seen as a Tory Brexit, without going back to the people, given how different it is to the Brexit that was promised, he's going to upset both sides. So, listen...
So would he hemorrhage more Labour MPs, do you think?
Look,
If he signs up to a deal with Theresa May to Brexit next week without a referendum, what happens to the Labour Party?
He can wave goodbye to any chance of getting into power. And listen, the other thing, Theresa May has given him a massive opportunity today. She runs around the place saying he's unfit to be Prime Minister, and she now says, come and help me do my job. If he gets to the right place now, which happens to be the place in the national interest, he actually can deal with these people who say he can't be Prime Minister.
Let's go to the vote. We're hearing the vote, this.
The ayes to the right, 315. The noes to the left, 310.
Thank you. The ayes to the right, 315. The noes to the left, 310. So the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Unlock.
So that motion is carried 315 to 310. Let me just bring in Gary Gibbon. What does that mean? What was this a vote on specifically?
This was on the backbenchers trying to seize control from the government and come up with a bill which would compel the government to seek a long extension delay to Brexit. It was struggling earlier. We saw it only won by one when they were actually trying to create time to debate it. Now its majority has increased a bit, but this is still a pretty tiny, fragile majority. So given that they're trying to do a constitutional innovation and rush this thing through in the teeth of government opposition, it means it's going to be a pretty tricky thing to pull off in its next phase in the House of Lords, and there is a third reading vote later in the Commons tonight.
Gary, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's go to the Parliament Central Lobby now, and Labour's Shadow Housing Secretary John Healey joins us now. Well, Jeremy Corbyn has been meeting Theresa May. Is it possible that he does an agreement with Theresa May to Brexit next week without there being a people's vote or a second referendum or a public vote?
We're a long way, I think, still from being able to say where these talks may end. They were certainly serious today, they were certainly constructive. They were longer than we expected, but also less productive than we expected, because there was no sign of the big offer that the Prime Minister had suggested last night she was willing to make.
But is that possible?
Adjust the terms of her failed deal.
Is it possible that you do a deal that doesn't involve putting this to the people?
Well, what was discussed today was exactly what Labour has argued for some time. The necessary content of a good and better Brexit deal than the government has negotiated, one that we think could get cross-party support and could be negotiated with the European Union, but also, especially in the circumstances of this chaos, the necessity after any deal gets through this House of Commons, led by this Prime Minister, that we need the public behind it for the much more challenging second phase, and that's got to mean, I think, a general election or a confirmatory,
right, so you are
confirmatory vote.
That you could Brexit, you could agree the withdrawal agreement, which is the point of no return, without a public vote. You've ditched that.
No, I'm saying to you quite simply that what we discussed and made sure was discussed at Downing Street this afternoon was exactly what we've been arguing for some time. Not just the content of a better Brexit deal, but also the requirement now, particularly after the chaos of the last 2 years, to have the public behind any moves for the next period, and that means a general election or it means a confirmatory vote.
Okay, so that's still in the game. Do you see any reason why she's going to come round to your...
It's not a game. These are very serious discussions. We're set on trying to find a way through this Brexit
We know
impasse
how serious this is,
in a way that the government has completely failed over the last few years.
I'm well aware of how serious this is, Mr Healey. I'm asking you, do you see any reason to think that she is going to compromise on the customs union from the talks today?
Well, time will tell. It was not clear today that she was yet willing to shift the lines of her Brexit deal onto the sort of basic starting points that we've been advocating. But she needs to do that if we're going to get a deal that can command the broad common sense support in Parliament and also honour the referendum.
Can you explain why Britain would be better off in a situation in which it has a customs union with the European Union and regulatory alignment than staying in the European Union?
Well, quite simply, our task at this stage is to respect the referendum, see through Brexit. It's what we said in our manifesto at the general election we would do. But it's quite clear that if we want to get a long way towards ensuring frictionless trade, get a long way to ensuring no hard border in Northern Ireland, to reflect the concerns of many who voted Remain about leaving in the first place, then that, alongside some of the concerns that we've set out about how we ensure we don't fall behind on critical standards like workers' rights, consumer protections and environmental standards, then those have got to be part of the deal. Now, we put them on the table today with Theresa May, the Prime Minister. She's yet to respond to that. There will be some technical work that goes on between the teams tomorrow, and there may be further discussions, but really she's got to demonstrate serious intent to adjust the terms of her deal before I think we can see some serious progress.
John Healey, thank you very much indeed. Well, joining me now, also from the lobby, is the Energy Minister Claire Perry, who attends Cabinet and so is very close to this whole process. Claire Perry, are we on the road now to a softer Brexit involving a customs union?
We're on the road, sorry, I'm holding onto my earpiece because it's slippy. We're on the road to a Brexit deal that commands a majority in the Houses of Parliament. And I was very clear through the whole process that we had to have a meaningful vote. That process has been attempted several times. The first rule in politics is, what are the numbers? And the second rule is, if you haven't got your numbers, what are you going to compromise on? And I think this was almost an inevitable outcome of the facts we've seen over the last few weeks, a very strong desire to deliver on the Brexit deal, as John was saying, a desire to deliver on that referendum result, which both of our parties stood on in the last election, but a realisation that, you know, despite negotiating a good deal, it did not command a majority, and the logical conclusion is you have to compromise.
Is your party prepared to compromise? I mean, what was going on in Cabinet for 7 hours, and is it true that a majority of the Cabinet wanted to leave with no deal?
No, so I never leak Cabinet, unlike some of my colleagues. I can categorically assure you that those numbers that appeared, for example, on the front pages of some of the newspapers today, were absolutely wrong. A majority of Cabinet did not support no deal. We had a series of conversations about what we wanted to deliver, and what we want to deliver is this deal. We don't want no deal. The majority absolutely don't want no deal. We also don't want an extended delay. There are various sort of appetites for delays, but we do not want to have to field candidates at the European elections. So Cabinet was, as always, because it's very finely balanced across the country in the parties, it was a robust series of conversations, but we came to a good outcome, and the Prime Minister, I think, felt very confident going into what I'm told are very constructive meetings.
But how many of your colleagues are prepared to compromise to go for a softer Brexit, which is what Labour are arguing for, which would involve a customs union? That means we wouldn't be able to do unilateral trade deals or bilateral trade deals. Are your colleagues prepared to sign up to that? That's
well,
crucial.
I think, as I understand the nuance that Labour have said, is that they want a customs arrangement, but they also want freedom to be involved around the table as customs deals are being negotiated by the EU. And again, this is something that has to be discussed, has to be thought carefully through as to what we want. Are
you prepared to back it?
Oh, well, I'm going to wait. And what I want to do is back a sensible deal that delivers Brexit so we can actually get this deal done and move through. What I want, though, is Britain to have a really successful trade policy. 80% of our exports are service-based. It's very striking that countries like Germany, who of course are still in the EU and with the same trade deals as us, are able to export twice as much as we do to India, for example.
But
so I personally... Go ahead, sorry.
Sorry to cut it, it's just we're short of time, but what's to stop the next Conservative leader tearing up whatever agreement that is non-legally binding Theresa May does with Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, there's been a series of amendments put forward in the current version of the withdrawal agreement, and I believe these will be strengthened to ensure that Parliament's role, and what I think ought to be a stronger cross-party role, comes into play at the next stage of negotiations. Well, again, but ultimately you have to sort of assume that you can see what's happening in Parliament, the ability of Parliament to be very clear about its absolute zero appetite, or limited appetite, forgive me, for no deal, and its its desire to seek a resolution, albeit we can't agree right now on what that is very, very strong. So I think we have to trust Parliament in this process, but Parliament is deadlocked. So if we can get the two main parties who both campaigned on this, who both have a majority of their MPs representing Leave seats. I mean, you know, the Labour Party's in a pickle too because they're Leave up north and Remain down south. That's a problem for them. So we have to get this sorted.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Funny way to spend your birthday, but thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, earlier I spoke to Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, who has had talks with both Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn today. I asked her what sort of deal she thinks they're working on.
My general fear just now is that with the clock ticking, time almost out on this process, that there will be such a desperation to do any deal that it will be a bad deal. You know, everybody might heave a sigh of relief that some agreement has been reached, but it will be very quickly obvious that it's not a compromise in the interests of the country. That's why I think there should be a request now for a long extension, an agreement to fight the European elections. Then by all means allow the Commons to come up with a compromise, but then put that compromise to the people to see whether they want a second best compromise or would prefer now, after everything we've learned in the last 3 years, to remain in the EU.
But where do you understand the compromise to be now? I mean, you've spoken to them both.
Well, you know, I think on substance, I think for Jeremy Corbyn, it's around customs unions, something that I'm not entirely clear on the definite detail of. What I'm not clear about is whether they're going to insist that any compromise is put to the people in another vote, and that for me is an essential part of this.
And the SNP, the third biggest party in Westminster, you're cut out of this, aren't you? I mean, you'll know we're in this process.
Well, I don't know, I've been meeting with both players this afternoon. Look,
but they're trying to do a deal between themselves, not with you, aren't they?
There's no doubt about it. Scotland has been treated appallingly since the 2016 vote. You know, at best, Scotland's interests have been treated negligently. At worst, they've been treated contemptuously by the UK government. I'm not convinced that either Theresa May or Jeremy Corbyn has Scotland's interests particularly high up their agenda.
So if this Labour Conservative compromise is basically the customs union, the SNP will vote against that and is against that?
Look, I'm not going to say definitively how we'll vote on options that we don't know what they are yet or what the choices will be. We don't know what kind of binary choices might be put before the House of Commons next week.
But if it is the customs union, look, it's unlikely you're going to be happy with what their compromise.
But I don't think a compromise like that would be good. The reason I'm not trying to dodge your question, I think before I can tell you how we will vote, we have to know exactly what we're voting on and what the choices are.
The First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon. Well, we can talk now to the Conservative MP, Steve Double, who's a Brexiteer, but who ended up voting for the deal. In fact, I think you said it was a turd of a deal, but maybe the best turd that we've got. Are you prepared for that to now get softer?
Sorry, my earpiece fell out. I missed what you said then.
I was asking you whether you're prepared for the deal that Theresa May has been putting to you, that you're not a big fan of, but ended up sort of going along with. Are you prepared for that deal to get softer in these talks with Jeremy Corbyn?
The withdrawal agreement was very much at the limit of what I feel I can support, and if as a result of these negotiations that are going on we end up with a withdrawal agreement that is an even softer Brexit, then it's something I'm really going to struggle to support and unlikely to do so.
Isn't the point that may not matter? Because if they have Labour votes, you're suddenly cut out of the whole thing. You know, the ERG doesn't matter anymore.
Well, that may well be the case, but it's clearly a very treacherous position for a Conservative Prime Minister to be in, where she comes forward with something that potentially a majority of her own MPs will not be able to support, and relies on Labour MPs to get through the House. And I think that would be a very unwelcome outcome if that was to happen.
Well, I mean, I know these sort of expressions of outrage have been being made all day, but so what? I mean, what happens? If she goes ahead and does this deal, what happens?
Well, we'll have to wait and see. Let's wait and see what these negotiations actually produce. I mean, there's a lot of expectation around, but you know, we've been in these situations before and it hasn't come to much. So let's wait and see what actually happens, and we'll have to take a view. But
well, I mean, if she's going anyway,
if the Prime Minister is moving towards getting Labour votes to support something to deliver Brexit, then I don't think that's going to play well in our party.
No, but I mean, she's going anyway, so she can just say, well, it doesn't matter. You know, I'll take the heat in order to deliver Brexit, which is what the British people voted for. I mean,
sorry, I'm really struggling to hear you.
What I'm saying is, you know, perhaps it doesn't matter that this is extraordinary and, you know, unwelcome in your party, because as far as she's concerned, she's leaving anyway. Her focus is delivering Brexit.
you may well be right, but I think the important thing is that what we want to, for me personally, is I want to keep our manifesto commitments. I want to stay true to what we've promised the British people many, many times, which is that we will be delivering a Brexit that is removing us from the EU institution of the custom market, the customs union, the single market, etc. And that's what I'll be sticking to. Now, others clearly have to take a view, and if this is the path the Prime Minister is choosing to go down, then clearly that's her prerogative, but I would be very concerned about the damage that would do to the Conservative Party, going forward.